That.
Okay, I think we're ready. Tim, do you want to go ahead and dive in?
Certainly. Good morning. Well, the beat goes on. And while I had nothing to do with the slogan, it certainly was fitting for our potential in-person meeting in Nashville. But I think it's also fair to say that it's equally as fitting for our entire cystinosis community and our virtual conference. I was thinking of last night, Jonathan Dix, who shared during our kickoff event that cystinosis doesn't take a day off, and neither do we. So the beat definitely does go on. My name is Tim Wyman. I am the interim president for CRN, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you all and providing an overview of CRN. And when it comes to providing an overview of CRN and all the good that CRN does on behalf of the entire cystinosis community, I can't think of a better person to share the stage with, or screen in this case, than Christy Greeley, CRN's executive director and VP of research. Welcome, Christy.
Hello, welcome to everybody. I see something in the chat that Terry Schluter saying that, oh, okay, we have audio now, so great. We wouldn't want to miss any of this. So welcome to everybody. So glad to have everybody back. Happy Saturday morning or afternoon, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. And we'll jump right in.
Yeah, so COVID may have forced the cancellation of our in-person event, but the beat definitely goes on. And as much as we all wanted to attend the in-person conference, when it became clear that it just wasn't possible, I think the CRN board did the right thing. They pivoted and planned what I think you're going to find is a unique virtual conference. And you know, many of you over the years have shared that the family conference is an important ingredient to our CRN community. And so we meet virtually with a fantastic agenda planned for the next couple of days. I think you're going to find that there's truly something for everyone, with lots of critical updates and informative panel sessions. So how about a little bit about CRN? CRN was formed in 1996. And in 1996, there were, just as there are today, various cystinosis organizations. But I'm told one thing unique at the time was one of the reasons that, or catalyst that CRN was formed, was to add a focus on advocating for and funding important research projects. So when I think of CRN's mission or vision, I think of really three prongs. First is supporting and advocating research. Second, providing family assistance. And then third, educating the public and medical communities about cystinosis. Those living with cystinosis deserve no less than our full commitment in achieving our mission and ultimately a cure. And I've come to know and really appreciate the dedication and hard work that the board does on behalf of the cystinosis community. Since 1996, there's been countless, numerous hands pitching in to really benefit our community. So to any past board members on our call, we owe you a great deal of gratitude for laying the groundwork that has led to CRN's contributions to the community. So CRN is essentially made up of a volunteer board of directors, an executive committee, scientific review board, medical and professional advisory committees, and then committee members and our membership. And I want to not only recognize and say thanks to our executive committee and board, but I also want you all to know who these caring folks are, because they're here to serve you. You know, if there's an area that you could use some information, some help making sure that the beat, does go on, reach out to these folks. So our volunteer executive committee, you can see on the screen. We have Tim, myself as the interim president, executive director, VP research, Christy, VP of development, Jonathan Dix, you heard from last night, Mary Beth, part of the, I think it was the WOW group. I won't say what that stands for, but been around a long time. VP of family support, Jen Wyman, treasurer, Jenny Sexton, and then secretary, Karen is filling in for Ina, as Ina's son, Victor, has recently gone through transplant. And then our board of directors, again, want to thank them for all the time and the contributions that they make. And to anyone on the call, if you're ever looking to serve CRN, encourage you to reach out. Gail, John, Herbert, who you're going to hear from later, Carol Hughes, Melanie, and then Sarah is part of A-Lab as a liaison. Now, our board can't do everything. So fortunately, we have some important, experienced and talented individuals that help us in a variety of ways. Christy, any comments? I know that Dana has certainly been a large part of this event. What about the other folks?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tim. We certainly could not do what we do every day without you know, our helpers here and our consultants. Dana, many of you have probably had some kind of contact with Dana. She's helped not only with this meeting, but several others in the past. Literally couldn't do it without her, or with Claire Johnstone, who has a variety of responsibilities for CRN. She's a communications professional, helps us out with social media and strategic planning, and did a lion's share of the conference planning too. So we thank them for that. Lisa Kovar has been our bookkeeper for many, many years. She's retiring from her service to CRN this year. And so thanks to her. And then Chris Vendrick as our graphic designer. And that really, with this small crew, we get a lot done.
Yeah, wonderful. So I mentioned earlier, you know, the key focus areas of CRN. So I want to dive in a little bit in each one of these areas. And we'll start with research. And Christy, as VP of Research, it seems like it might be appropriate for you to make some comments rather than me in this area.
Absolutely, Tim. So in our research function, we oversee the activities of our advisory committees and our scientific review board. They're made up of many of the cystinosis experts in the world. And they help us with not only advice on our medical content and initiatives and publications that we do, but also review grants that come in and help us to decide what's important to fund. On this slide, you can see our scientific review board is currently made up of Dr. Gall, Dr. Cascal, Dr. Langman, Dr. Mannon, and Dr. Taney. If you have the next slide, Tim, I think, yeah, this lists our current medical and professional advisory boards. And you can see there's a wide range of folks who are experts in the field, who give very generously of their time to assist, including with the meeting this weekend. And thank you for that. So Tim, maybe if you could go back to that first slide on research, I'll just touch on a couple of the little points. So we do have a usually yearly, sometimes every other year, call for proposals. I think we funded close to $7 million over the course of the life of CRN, which is pretty important to note. We also are currently funding close to $1 million in research. One advantage of the pandemic is we haven't spent as much on sort of the meetings and things that we're able to do this meeting, but it certainly isn't as costly as doing an in-person meeting. So we're able to use those funds for other important purposes like research. We also are involved in doing the kinds of updates that I talked about and planning this conference. I should also note, and because we have so many people from around the world, we participate on what's called the Cystinosis Community Advisory Board, and it's made up of cystinosis leaders from around the world. I represent the US on that board, but we provide advice and review to both researchers and industry partners who are doing work in cystinosis. So I'm honored to be a part of that community advisory board with the rest of the leaders from around the world.
And I'm looking at this list of our medical and professional folks, and I'm just in awe on how many folks I have met over the years at different family conferences that they spend their own time, if you will, to visit with our community. It's really something.
We're blessed.
Yes, thank you to all of them. Development is another word, sometimes a code for fundraising, kind of, or what I like to call fundraising. Working together, I really think and hope that we can find improved treatments and accelerate, an ultimate cure. But it takes hope, and it also takes raising funds. I've shared the story many times of we used to have a family fundraiser, a walk, and I would be on top of my truck talking to a couple hundred people. And I'd basically say, you know what, I'd like to say that money doesn't matter, but it does. It's what drives research, what ultimately will lead to a cure. So you all know on this call that, you know, cystinosis and other rare diseases don't get the same attention and funding as other conditions. So every dollar counts. And I would encourage you, if you are thinking about a fundraising idea and need a little help, reach out to me, reach out to our board member, Jonathan Dix, and certainly we'll do everything that we can do to help.
Yeah, let me just chime in that the vast majority of those funds that you see have been put towards research. We do a lot with a little in terms of, you know, infrastructure, the kinds of, you know, cost that the money it takes to run a foundation, the things that we do. We are lucky to have so many volunteers who volunteer their time, so we can minimize really what we pay for paid staff, and you know, but the family support piece that we are so focused on is a small portion of that money, but it's to me just as important as the research part. So we appreciate everyone's support in all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the surprises for me when I came on the board and saw the donor list was literally how many people donate to CRN. And you know what? Yes, there are some large dollars, but it really is a huge community effort, and we're very fortunate that a lot of us are out there doing our best to raise money, and it is important. Family support. I was struck yesterday during the family introductions at how many people talked about at the time of diagnosis, how important it was to have a resource, a community like CRN. I mean, I've heard it before, but every time it gives me a renewed appreciation for what CRN really is all about and helps. You may recognize this last name. Jen Wyman is VP of Family Support. And I think just like our family was so fortunate back in 2006 to be welcomed by CRN, I hope that you know, we can do that for a lot of other people. And it's really that important time where CRN is that community that says basically, hey, our stories are a bit different, but boy, we got some similarities and you're not alone. Education and awareness. Christy, why don't you highlight some of the couple areas on here?
Sure. So Mary Beth Kremenacher, who many of you know is our VP of Advocacy and Awareness, and so or Education and Awareness, sorry. And so with that as her focus, she is in charge of making sure that we have a strong presence at important professional conferences. I think this is something that we do and we do well, and it's important. There are very many rare disease groups that exhibit at these, and we're one, and it's noticed. And we're often able to reach out to physicians from all over the world who either perhaps treat a person with cystinosis or are willing to learn more about the disease. So it's always very impactful. We also, under this area, we have a big website and social media presence, which I know all of you on this call have seen, to try to keep our community updated. A newsletter that's just going on now. It's available on the website. We do it twice a year. We have lots of different educational guides and brochures that are available to your community, to our community, for you to share, you know, with your treating physicians and other healthcare professionals. And Mary Beth can help you sort of navigate those materials. We're also part of some of the major rare disease organizations, groups like Global Genes, NORD, which is the National Organization for Rare Disorders. I mentioned Urotis. We sort of are on a tangent relationship to them via our relationship with Cystinosis Network Europe and our friends there and the Community Advisory Board that we're part of. We also, as part of education awareness, have initiated this Adult Leadership Advisory Board. You've seen many members of that ALAB group on our call already. They'll be leading different parts of our conference, and for us, it's a real focus to make sure that individuals living with the disorder are part of the leadership team. So nothing about us without us is something that we hear a lot in rare. And for us, that not only means obviously parents of those with cystinosis, but those who actually live with the disorder. I just also want to note on here that Cystinosis Awareness Day, you've seen it a lot. This was sort of the brainchild of that communication specialist that I mentioned at the beginning, Claire Johnstone, every year on May 7th to highlight the most common deletion, the 57 kilobyte deletion. And then Rare Disease Day, we have a big presence at. So lots going on.
Mary Beth has been on the board for like a month or two now, or a little bit longer.
or a decade or two. No, but yes, she hasn't been on the board the whole time, but she has been certainly involved in the community for, she said it yesterday, 30 some years.
Yeah, and I bring that up only for our, entire call folks here. If Mary Beth is a wonderful resource and would welcome to be of help to you any way she could if you have any questions.
She has a wonderful historical experience with cystinosis. She can tell you where we've been, where we're going, and how lucky we are.
You got it. I just want to echo two things you said, Christy. The website that we have, I think, is super fantastic. I mean, the information on there is great. It's also where, if you want to see additional information about the financials of CRN as an example, or tax form, you can go there as well. You also mentioned the newsletter that will be mailed, a print copy, but it is indeed already on the website if folks want to go view that, correct?
Correct.
All right. Well, you mentioned this Adult Leadership Advisory Board, ALAB, already. And I think it was Colleen Hammond I was talking to a few weeks ago. And she just said something that struck with me that, and this, Jonathan mentioned it as well. I mean, fortunately, our adults living with cystinosis, that is a very, I'll say, a large growing population. And boy, is that fantastic. But how long is the ALAB, when did that start roughly, this initiative?
So it actually started under a different name. It was called Future by Design initially, and that was a few years ago. Okay. And sort of morphed into Adult Leadership Advisory Board. And when we decided to really provide a platform for those in the community that are interested in becoming advocates and doing that well and learning about it. And we've provided advocacy training and leadership training for those adults that have been involved. And they're at the point now where they're running their own group. Cheryl Simmons was the leader of that group initially. She's transitioned off, and now we have a new group, which is it was by design that we wanted new adults involved. And for those that are on the call that perhaps are newly diagnosed, I think this is motivational to you, to show you that there'll be difficult times, but your child will grow into an adult, and this is sort of the perspective part that we mentioned, that there was a time when cystinosis was deadly, when transplant wasn't involved, or wasn't available, when Cysteine wasn't an option yet, and we have all these possibilities now that have enabled our adults to grow into people who can really take charge within our community. So that's the idea behind ALAB.
And so on the screen now are our current members of ALAB. Is this a generally an open group? Does one apply to be a part of this board? What's the process?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tim. So yes, yearly they accept applications, and we have an application process precisely for the reason that I mentioned. That we want folks that are really interested in working and learning about advocacy and getting involved in the community and really leading projects and contributing. You can see on the website and via our social media some of the different things that they do. They have an Instagram site that's private for teens. There are podcasts. There are Zoom sessions. They have a scholarship fund available now. So lots of great initiatives. So if you're interested, they've just added new folks to the board, and you'll meet some of those during the Individuals Living with Cystinosis panel tomorrow. But every year we're open to more people joining. And if you're an adult living with cystinosis and you want to join any of those sessions, they would welcome you.
Wonderful. And you know, I've seen or heard you say before that, you know, collaboration among all cystinosis community stakeholders, not just CRN, is really critical if we're going to, you know, reach that one of those visions of finding improved treatments and ultimately a cure. So as you mentioned earlier, Christy, CRN does collaborate with a variety of groups, worldwide groups. We had some folks on the call last night or their morning, it seemed like, from Australia and Mexico. Where else did we have folks calling in from?
We had someone from Germany that I work with on the CAV who was vacationing in Spain. We had folks in Saudi Arabia, all over the place. Oh, the UK, all over.
The UK.
And we'll have to take a look at who's here today, but that's the beauty of virtual, is that we get people who wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet us in person. So we're looking at the glass half full and celebrating that we have all these folks. But Tim's point is good. Our philosophy as CRN is that we work, you know, hand in hand with people all over the world. We are involved in Cystinosis Network Europe, which sounds not exactly correct, but we are the U.S. representative and try to, you know, voice the U.S. perspective, not just the CRN, but really the U.S. perspective from the community, you know, and what the activities of that group. And we're connected with all of these groups and more. And, you know, if rare diseases don't recognize borders, we all are the same, and we all want to work together towards the same end. And
if the Cystinosis Network Europe has a conference opposite years of ours, so they'll hold their in-person next year? That's correct. So the next, and we'll have information, we've put out some information on it, preliminary, but it will be next July, I think, off the top of my head, 2022 in Brussels. So there'll be information there, and I'm hoping that they'll, you know, have some kind of hybrid model. I haven't talked to them about the details yet, but you know, hopefully we'll be able to join from all over the world. Mm-hmm. So another group of stakeholders are the rare disease organizations. You highlighted a couple of these, I believe, in the awareness and education area. Yeah, these are all organizations that we partner with because, you know, that amplified voice of lots of rare disease organizations is super strong and super powerful. I see it every day in my work life, and I see it certainly with CRN. Some that I haven't. Alliance has been around for a long time. We're involved with them. Every Life Foundation is a newer organization. They are the organization that organizes Rare Disease Week, which is actually typically earlier in the year. It's actually taking place this week virtually. Sort of you know, conflicted with our meeting. It doesn't typically, but a lot of times we send representatives. We've done it many times to help lobby and advocate for our rare disease concerns, and specifically cystinosis ones. We've recently, I also want to highlight that we've recently become a member of the National Health Council, and this is a very prestigious health policy group where there are a lot of different health care stakeholders, including rare disease group leaders, and Mary Beth Kremenacher is leading as part of her. Okay, Christy, I'll bite. What makes it so prestigious? So it's a national group, and it's really focused a lot on, you have to, well, first I should say, you have to apply and be accepted. And so they did a thorough review of our structure of our organization, what we do, what our outreach is, what our capabilities are. And so we were very honored to be accepted. But it also, because there has that sort of vetting before they allow groups to be part of them, you know, there's an expectation that we're participating at a high level. And so for us as CRN and as our organization, it's important to have a voice at the table when we're talking about health policy decisions that affect the rare disease community. So that is why. Wonderful. So we're talking about community, another important part of the community, and collaboration with our pharmaceutical companies. I assume that most folks recognize the names on the list here. They support us throughout the year in a variety of different ways. Again, you're talking about this collaboration among everyone who has a stake or has a say in improving treatments and hopefully ultimately a cure. We have some special family conference sponsors, and Leadient Horizon Recordati, that I practiced saying that name for the last 7 days, so hopefully I got that right. And AvroBio as well, our specific family conference partners. Again, I mean, you're an important part of our community. Your support is both necessary as well as appreciated.
Yeah, let me just build a little on that. I know we're
Please.
Almost to time. Looks like we have 4 minutes, but we work just so, and Jonathan alluded to this yesterday. In his position as VP of Development, he really takes the lead with our relationships. But the idea with these groups, we work with them. It's not just sponsorship of events and things like the conference, but we really work with them to co-create the programming that they produce. You know, for the cystinosis community, they come to us, you know, when they need advice on a whole variety of matters, and it's very important that we have a voice at the table. As I mentioned before, I love that quote, "Nothing about us without us." And for us to be partnered with these organizations that produce the treatments that we need is of the utmost importance.
Wonderful. So before I close, Christy, any final thoughts, comments you want to share?
No, I think you know, we're happy that everybody joined us to sort of get an overview on what CRN does. That's a really high level one. You can reach out to any of us, anyone on the board, at any time with any questions. We're an open book, and if you have specific questions about programming, you know, those, I know we put those slides up, but on the website you can contact. There are actually links to contact all of us on the executive committee, and we can help lead the way. And if you know you need more information on any of these topics. Good. So I will, at this point, I think, Tim, if we're done, I can go into a little bit of housekeeping and introduce our next.
I just kind of thinking about what we just went through and trying to sum things up. You know, again, it hit me last night that CRN is such a special community, and CRN's making an impact. I shared our family cystinosis journey began 15 years ago, roughly. You know, it's been challenging at times, but our daughter Casey certainly lives with that. The beat will, goes on attitude. I'm in awe of her. I'm in awe of all those who live with cystinosis. The CRN and the caring people that make up CRN has helped our family meet the challenge over the years, and I know that they can help others and you. So until there's a cure for cystinosis, CRN is going to be committed to those 3 things: supporting and advocating research, providing family assistance, and educating the public and medical communities about cystinosis. And this family conference is an important part of the fabric that weaves our community together. And I hope they have a great, rest of the virtual conference as the beat goes on. All yours, Christy.
All right, thanks for that, Tim. So I just want to let everyone know, you can just stay to this link for the rest of our morning sessions. So that's Dr. Zaritsky Grimm sessions. And we'll have more information when we go to the break. But for now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and that is Dr. J.J. Zaritsky. He is head of pediatric nephrology at St. Chris Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. He'll be giving us an overview on cystinosis to sort of kick off the content of our day, entitled A Review of Old and New. And I want to also mention that Dr. Zaritsky is a part of our medical advisory board, and we are very grateful to his contributions and generous donation of time to be part of our conference today. So Dr. Zaritsky, I will send it over to you.
Thank you very much, Christy. So this is actually a tough lecture to give, because a lot of you out there just want to hear about the new, and then there's a group of you who want to hear about the old. So I'm going to try to balance my talk in the 30 minutes that's been given me. So let's start. Just with a disclosure that I'm a paid consultant for Horizon, and I'm going to mention some of their medications today. So we'll be talking about what is cystinosis, who's affected, why does it occur, when does the disease itself manifest, how do you diagnose, and most importantly, we're going to talk about treating cystinosis because it's a treatable disease. And then the future. So I have quite a few slides on the future for those who want to hear about what's new. So what is cystinosis? It's a very rare, but as I'll emphasize several times, treatable genetic disease. It's a lysosomal storage disease, and you'll learn more about the lysosome. There's nothing like learning about a lysosome Saturday morning, but you see that little print there. It's the recycling plant in the cell. And we'll go over how cystine accumulates in the lysosome and eventually poisons it. And the most important thing to recognize is these lysosomes, or these recycling centers, are present in every cell in the body. So that means it's a multi-organ or system disease. Every cell in the body is affected. And we see a natural history of the disease where different organs are affected at different times. So who's affected? Extremely rare. We estimate probably there's between 400 and 600 people in the United States, maybe 2,000 worldwide. Most patients are diagnosed with this nephropathic form, and nephropathic means the kidney is damaged, and that's why myself as a pediatric nephrologist has given this talk very early on in infancy or early childhood. And then we recognize that the untreated disease, that is, if you were to do nothing, the lifespan is extremely short. But with kidney transplantation and cystine depleting therapies, we're not so sure what the lifespan is because we have patients surviving through their 5th decade of life. And that's why it's so important when I give this lecture to talk about the treatments. So the why, what happens in cystinosis? And essentially, it's a mutation in one gene. This gene, colloquially known as the CTNS gene, basically encodes a transporter called cystinosin. And this is a transporter present in the lysosomes. So the most, and here you can see the various mutations that have been identified in this gene. The most common is this 57 kilobyte deletion. So we'll talk more. It's important to recognize that depending on the mutation or the deletion, that can affect the severity of the disease. So how is it inherited? A lot of times people come to us and they say, well, you know, mom and dad don't have the disease. Why does our child have the disease? And this is an autosomal recessive disease. So you got to go all the way back to middle school or even high school when you learned about Peapod genetics, Mendelian genetics. And essentially what happens is, you know, we're given 2 books and our body reads from these books or genes to build our body, essentially. Mom and dad both have one good book and then one book that encodes an error in this CTNS gene. So when they have children, just like rolling the die, there's a 25% chance that one child will receive a normal book from the dad, a normal book from the mom. There's a 50% chance that the child gets one normal book and one book that's not been encoded correctly. And then there's a 25% chance that the child receives a book that doesn't encode for the CTNS gene and another book from both parents. And this is the child that's going to have cystinosis. So it's important to recognize that this is an inherited disorder. It's not something that's, passed communicatively from one kid to another, but it's inherited from both parents. So the why. So here I am going to try to step you through a lysosome, and I'm going to get to an analogy that I always borrow from Dr. Grimm. But cystinosin is this transporter. So normally stuff gets into the recycling plant in the cell, and proteins are broken down into various amino acids. And if you have normal transporters, the cystine and for example, lysine move out. However, can you imagine if you're born with the absence or a cystinosin, the cystine transporter is damaged? What happens then? Cystine accumulates within the lysosome and eventually jams it up. And that's what causes the disease. Now, this is Dr. Grimm's analogy. The lysosome is a recycling plant. So if we can imagine that we have three people working. We have the metal person, the paper person, and the wood person. As stuff gets through the factory, these people go and do their job. Well, what happens if, for example, the paper person just disappears? The metal and the wood guy keep working, but eventually so much paper builds up into the lysosome that you're left with a destroyed recycling plant. And this is an important analogy. Why? Because you're going to see when it comes to cystine depleting therapy. Now, one of the things, what's old is new. From the origin, when we look back at the discovery of cystinosis and the gene that encodes it, we recognize this transporter's encoded here. And this is a fancy diagram of a lysosome, and then cystine accumulates. But we also recognize that we don't have the full picture, that we wonder, do other genes contribute to the phenotype of the disease or how the disease manifests? Or are there other functions of cystinosis? And so I'd encourage you to look at this paper by Craig Langman, who's here among us today. He has a nice review on some of the other functions of cystinosis, and you're going to see why that comes up later in the talk. So where does cystinosis manifest? Where here we have this natural history, right? And the natural history itself has been modified by treatment. That is, very early on, you might see thyroid disease or muscle weakness, but we've been able to push those diseases out and to some extent limit the manifestations of the disease with treatment. And so I have this red arrow here to remind you, though, that you see this kind of progression of disease, but the natural history of the disease has changed, and it's changed because we have cystine depleting therapies. And that's something very important to notice. So for example, if a patient did not take their cystine depleting therapy, they would, we know, develop pulmonary dysfunction. But with proper management of the disease, and when you take your cystine depleting therapy, we can really almost eliminate pulmonary dysfunction. There's other manifestations of the disease that we can't eliminate completely, like the kidney disease. And most patients with cystinosis end up going to get a renal transplant, and I'll talk about that as part of the treatment. But for every year you're on treatment, on average, you gain a year of kidney function. So moving on, here are sort of the age-related clinical characteristics of untreated. So untreated, and this is sort of going through the natural history as if you did not get treatment. But it's very important to recognize you take your treatment, you take it on time, you keep your cystine levels as good as you can get them. A lot of these manifestations we don't necessarily see, or for the kidney disease, right, that's pushed down. So you need your renal transplant later in life. So I'm kind of moving quickly because I really want to spend some time on some of the new stuff. If you have questions, make sure you can chat me or throw a question in there. Okay. So moving on here, what about the kidney disease? And remember that term nephropathic, meaning affecting the kidney renal disease? What we see in the kidney is basically the kidney is one of the first organs to get damaged. And if you look, this is a normal picture of a microscopic element of the kidney, the glomerulus and the tubule that supports it. We get this deformity or this death of this very important part of the tubule and the proximal tubule. And what ends up happening then is that part of the tubule is really responsible for reabsorbing a lot of the good stuff. And so a child with cystinosis develops quite a bit of urine output or polyuria and starts leaking proteins, glucose, phosphate, calcium. And this leads to one of the first manifestations of the disease called renal Fanconi syndrome, named after the guy who described it. But essentially, these are some of the manifestations we see. We see a lot of urine. And because we see a lot of urine, the child is constantly thirsty and very prone to dehydration. We can see constipation, vomiting, because a lot of those elements that the kidney normally reabsorb are important for growing the body. The child develops a failure to thrive, does not grow normally. We see delayed growth, delayed development. And one of the organ systems most affected by this leakage of calcium and phosphorus is the bones. And we develop a classic disease of childhood called rickets, where we see kind of bending of the bones. And I don't have enough time to get into this, but your bones are made up of calcium, phosphorus, and rebar. This is a disease of the cement of the bones. You're not able to put enough calcium and phosphorus. So when you go to build that building tilts to the side and doesn't achieve its normal height. Okay. One of the other manifestations is that cystine, just like the cystine is accumulating in lysosomes throughout the body, it also accumulates within the cornea. And we see these cystine crystal deposits in the eye. Eventually, enough crystals build up so the patient develops photophobia or painful, their eyes hurt them and they want to avoid bright light. Most patients have visible crystals by 16 months of age. This is another very treatable disease, and I'll mention why the 16 months, I've emphasized this. Some of the more characteristics later in life, we can see a particular pattern of weakness in some of the hand muscles and some of the musculature, especially in the shoulder. We can also see abnormal calcifications in the brain when we go to look at the brain. And here's this kind of idea of proximal weakness, that you get this weakness in your shoulders. Eventually, patients can go on to develop swallowing difficulties and muscle weakness. And not only is the front of the eye or the cornea affected, but the back of the eye can be affected. And I want to remind you that these are more slides from the natural history. A lot of these can be limited or even prevented sometimes by taking your treatment on time. Now, the most difficult thing about making the diagnosis of a rare disease is this kind of thing I'm always telling the residents. If you don't think of the diagnosis, you'll never make it. And the flip side from the patient side is, doc, you might not have seen the disease, but the disease has seen you. And so children often, when they present with cystinosis, often receive the wrong diagnosis. They're diagnosed with another form of kidney malfunction, or maybe even diabetes. They might be given a diagnosis of rickets, but we don't understand the understanding of it, or failure to thrive. And this is often when I tell the residents, and then that mom in the emergency room says there's something wrong with my child, and she's been, or dad, and has been in the emergency room multiple times for the same complaint. That's a huge red flag. That's a flag to say, hey, wait a second, what's going on? Time out. But even if we look on the Northeast seaboard where I am, the average length of diagnosis is 6 to 12 months. There is a delay, even though you're at these huge medical centers and you have access to care. And that's one of the difficult things about having a rare disease, or even trying to diagnose a rare disease. Now, one of the things we can do is we're able to measure the actual cystine levels in a particular set of cells called white blood cells. And this is sort of a confusing topic often because there's two different methodologies, there's two different levels. I will mention that new and improved is that there are these white blood cell cystine collection kits. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at this website here, because this really helps those physicians and parents and patients that are off alone, the kind of the one-offs, right? That these kits are available for free, and your doctor can decide that which method they want to send out to. It's important that the same methods used and the collection is really well organized. But this is a huge benefit. And one of the nice things about the pandemic is you used to have to pick up the kit from your doctor's office. Now your doctor writes an order and the kit can be delivered to you. And often we ask that patients get, when they're right on target, they get a level every quarter. And I didn't spend a lot of time. We can spend more time in the questions about what the levels mean, et cetera. So other ways of making the diagnosis, you can look in the eye, and this is what the term we use is pathognomonic. We see crystals in the eye, you have some form of cystinosis like this. And so a good eye doctor doing a slit lamp investigation, they see these crystals and they can make the diagnosis. You can do prenatal testing, but the big thing, and one of the new things, is just genetic testing. And here I show you how expensive it used to be to sequence the entire genome of a human being. And look at the costs where they've come down. We've done better than that Moore's law that describes, integrated circuits and computers. And I can tell you right now is that I have the availability, essentially to test for free on a huge panel of renal disease. It's free for Medicaid, free for Medicare. So if you have more questions about that, how to get a genetic testing, which has become so prevalent now and so easy, send me a text or something. I can give you some more information, but I can almost guarantee you that the old way of making the diagnosis, checking the levels, checking the corneal crystals, is going to be replaced by genetic testing. And as this testing gets better and better and better, we wonder is how quickly are we going to be able to make these diagnoses? Maybe there's going to be some universal screening in the future. We don't know yet. So what about treatment? Here's this idea of the kidney, right? And when that proximal tubule doesn't work, we get a bucket that's normally supposed to hold in all those valuable chemicals and minerals and proteins. And instead, someone's poked a bunch of holes in the bucket. So no matter how much you try to fill the bucket, it's always leaking. And so we always want these children to get unrestricted access to water and fluids. We want to make sure they're on a variety of supplements. So as it leaks out, we're trying to pour on top of the bucket. We often have to help out the thyroid, and often growth hormone is used in these patients. But these are the supportive therapies. That is, they're not treating the actual disease, but treating some of the manifestations of the disease. What about actual treatment? And this is really cool. The cystine depleting therapy. Essentially what we do is we give patients a cystine depleting therapy. Here's the untreated lysosome where we have the buildup of cystine. With this drug called cysteamine, it actually binds to cystine and is actually able to go through another transporter. And so the going back to the recycling plant, that paper person went out, they got a cigarette, they're never coming back. And now meanwhile, paper's building up. But what cysteamine does is basically taps the metal guy on the shoulder and says, hey, do me a favor. I know you know how to do your metal. Take care of the paper as well. But because and then we're able to move everything through. So the paper actually moves through the metal guy's side of the factory, the recycling plant, and the recycling plant keeps moving along. What's important to recognize is that metal guy only knows to do metal. So as soon as you stop tapping him on the shoulder, every 6 hours or every 12 hours, he goes back to just doing metal, and the paper reaccumulates. So that's why I really like that recycling model. It really explains the lysosome and explains the cystine depleting therapy. Now, one of the most powerful places to see it in action is in the eye. And often I'll show patients that you have this cornea that's clouded with all these cystine crystals. 6 months later, look at that cornea, clear. And so this is that picture is worth 1,000 words. This is what's happening on inside the body. Now you have to use the drops for the eyes, and you take cysteamine orally for the body, but look how effective it is in the eye. So you get a view of what's actually happening when you take your meds. Just something new. The last time I gave this talk, I talked about a wafer that you'd put in your eye. The latest thing I found was that this gel that you're able to put in your eye that sits there. So you put the gel in once a day, and it slowly dissolves. So you're only having to treat your eye once a day. You're even doing better than taking your cysteamine therapy. There's been a couple changes in the field of the eye drops, what's available, what's not available. There's been some shortages. I will let you know that there's a new FDA-approved formulation called Cystadrops. Another form of the drops had you put the drops in the eye every waking hour while you're awake. That's what how it was studied. These drops are approved for taking them 4 times a day during waking hours. They are naturally a little bit more viscous. So I do find that my younger children have a harder time. It's harder to get it in the eye and keep it there. But this is a great alternative for adults who are able to put those drops in, and you're only doing it 4 times a day. All right, moving on. What about kidney function? Cysteamine. So without therapy, the majority of patients are on dialysis or transplanted by age 10. But with cysteamine therapy, we have this expression, for every year you take your cysteamine, you basically gain a year of renal function. We're not able to cure the kidney disease. And that's a very complex explanation of why we're not able to cure the disease with cysteamine. But for every year you're on treatment, you gain an additional year. And that's huge. Here's this red line at age 10. You can see no treatment. Most patients, this is a marker of how your kidney's working. 0 means it's not working. Most patients hit the axis here. With partial treatment, we're starting to see these lines come out. And look, with adequate treatment, we really see these lines pushed out, pushed out. So we also know that there's some neurocognitive problems seen in cystinosis, but we recognize cysteamine actually improves neurological outcomes. And I don't have enough time to go through this, but essentially this is a chronic progressive disease that has a treatment that's extremely effective. Very important to recognize. Now, what about, a lifelong disease? With a chronic disease comes chronic problems, and it's hard, with your eye, you can actually see the crystals building up. In your body, you don't see that. And so we really have to remind patients and families that, they need to take their medicines. Often the treatment itself can be hard to tolerate, and sometimes that limits the amount of treatment we can give. We recognize that the immediate release form of cystine depleting therapy requires every 6-hour dosing. That is, you're tapping the metal guy on the shoulder every 6 hours. Hey, move the paper through. This can be difficult for a variety of reasons because you can never really get a full night of sleep. We also recognize that cysteamine is very toxic to the stomach. And a lot of patients, if you take this medicine, essentially you're going to have some GI side effects or gastrointestinal side effects. It's very important to talk to your doctor because they can help alleviate or ameliorate a lot of these symptoms. Also, cysteamine is metabolized to this kind of sulfur metabolite, which gives this kind of rotten egg smell, which can lead to body odor and essentially bad breath. Very difficult. Can you imagine if you're a teenager being told, I have to take this medicine every 6 hours? You might feel some stomach upset, and you might smell differently. So we do recognize, though, that taking the medicine is very important. And I just focus on this graph here. And I'm not talking about levels today, but just you can just see the difference between these two groups. That if you take your medicine every 6 hours and we check a level, we get this sort of level. And I'm just going to take my word for it. This is normal. If, though, you take a little bit of a break, you say, I'm going to sleep in and get my 9 hours of sleep and then take your pill, you can see that your cystine level, or the way we measure, goes up, right? And I can tell you that it's very difficult to dose a medicine 4 times a day. It just is. It's very difficult for people to do that. Fortunately, there is another form. It's called Procysbi. This is the same medicine, the same cystine depleting therapy. It's the extended release version of it. Essentially, they take all these little, they take the medicine, coat it, and each bead is like a snowflake. They're all little different sizes. And then as the medicine makes your way through the small intestine, it's slowly absorbed. And you can see, I don't have time to go through this, it allows for twice daily dosing as opposed to the 4 times a day. Something new in cysteamine in the extended release, instead of having, a lot of patients don't like to take a lot of pills for a variety of reasons, or they might have some muscle weakness. It's now available in these packets. So as opposed to a 75 milligram pill, you can take 4 of those, you can take 1 packet. This is very effective, especially if you're used to opening up the capsule and dumping it out into applesauce or mixing it with something. So that's something new. Finally, the renal transplant outcomes, they're excellent in cystinosis. And this is some old data that it shows that, patients who are cystinosis, for whatever reason, seem to do better with their graft survival. We're not exactly so sure why. The good news is, with cystinosis, you're more likely to get a preemptive transplant because your doctor can plan ahead. There's better survival. There's less rejection. The bad news is often it's in your teenage years, and you still need to take your cystine depleting therapies. You still need to take them. Some updates. There's some updates from 2019, a paper here, basically looking at 3 eras of data. So 3 sets of data. And essentially what they saw was the age at ESRD, the rates of acute rejection, the GFR or the function of kidney, and patient survival has all improved with time. So as we get better with transplant, the cystinosis children are coming along with that. So, there's gradual, steady improvement in this field. Now, my favorite topic, the hints of the future. I only have 6 minutes to go through this, which is crazy. But this is one of my favorite topics here. We don't fully understand why patients, despite getting cystine replacement therapy, develop the kidney or the swan neck lesion. We're now starting to get an idea that some of the stuff that the kidney does is reabsorption of the stuff that it's trying to do, right? is actually can be toxic to the kidney. So could you imagine if we told the kidney, don't reabsorb those amino acids, then that cysteine doesn't build up in the lysosome. And that's what this graph shows here. And I wonder, still wonder, if this is going to be a universal treatment for a lot of kidney disease, that if we block reabsorption by blocking one of these two proteins, that we can prolong renal survival. The child might still waste calcium, phosphorus, amino acids, but maybe not develop the renal disease. So this is something to look forward to. Other hints of the future is we recognize that cysteamine, for whatever reason, doesn't treat the whole disease. Doesn't treat the whole disease. And so we're starting to have people look at other treatments that can prevent some of the other diseases, the other disease manifestations that come along. And I don't have enough time to go through this, but I'm just telling you that some people have been looking at a combination of cysteamine and another drug, right, to basically keep cells alive, So this is something else that's going on. This slide, I deliberately don't want to spend a lot of time on because you're going to have a whole half hour on it. But this idea that there's an active trial going on with gene therapy to do an autologous bone marrow transplant that has the normal CTNS gene. And so you're going to hear more about this later in the talk. Very exciting stuff. Now, finally, I just want to talk about, this gene therapy. Gene therapy has been around for a very long time. Patients are always asking me, when is gene therapy going to happen? And I still don't have an answer for you, but I can tell you it's happening. It's happening. And so just recently in the New England, there was a publication of a paper for a different disease, a liver disease where an abnormal protein is produced. It's called TTR amyloid. However, using this new CRISPR technology, some very smart people were able basically to put these genetic tools into a lipid nanoparticle that's taken up by the liver. What happens when you inject it? It moves, it's absorbed by the liver, and this CRISPR technology, which there's no way I would have enough time to explain it, and I wouldn't be the one wanting to explain it, is able to go in and selectively cut out the abnormal gene. And these patients now have been cured of their TTR amyloid. They've been cured. There's not a lot of patients, but this is really an incredible proof of concept. The same thing is happening in the sickle cell disease. They haven't got to the point where they cut out the abnormal gene and put in a normal one, but that's coming. That's coming down the pike. So now, I just wanted this expression, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. Some of the older people in the room will recognize this. Why do I put this up there? Because at the last conference, we had an incredible speaker speak about Castlebaum. What's his name? Baum, I can't remember his full name, but he talked about Castleman's disease. And when he recognized he had the disease, he said he recognized there wasn't a Santa Claus out there working and a bunch of elves working on the disease. I have to say, when you do a literature search for cystinosis, thanks to the CRN, thanks to the CRF, thanks to dedicated research out there are Santa Clauses working on this disease. And I'm amazed that every time I go look through the literature that there is new stuff coming down the pike. And I'm telling you, a lot of the stuff that they develop for cystinosis is going to treat other diseases, other rare diseases. We're going to be able to pull those treatments into cystinosis. So just to remind you, cystinosis is a rare but treatable genetic disease that affects every cell in the body. This idea, you may remind your docs, you may never have seen the disease, but it's seen you, right? Current treatments, cysteamine, the cystine depleting therapy that keeps that recycling plant moving, the supportive care, renal transplant for now, but the future is bright. And I can say as a Jewish person, yes, for cystinosis, there is a Santa Claus. There's people working out there. That's it. I made it with 2 minutes to spare. So I rushed a little bit. So, there's the name. Yeah, Faggenbaum.
I was going to chime in with that.
Yeah, that's an incredible to read that book. I have to say though, that guy's an incredible. I mean, he would have gone on to. I mean, he happened to work on Castleman's, but he would have worked on something else and been curing something. So yeah, very good read, and he gave an incredible talk.
He did. We were lucky enough to have him as our keynote speaker 2 years ago in Philadelphia, and he really is an amazing man. So check him out. His name is in the, and we have information on his book on our website actually too. So thank you so much, Dr. Zaritsky. That was really an amazing talk. I know we gave you, it was a tall order to go over the entire, of cystinosis in a half an hour, but you nailed it. And we did want to just give people sort of highlights of, what we're going to go into more depth on in other parts of the conference. So I just wanted to mention a couple of housekeeping items before we go into our next speaker. But at the end of this session, so these sessions are all accessible through the same link. And so please stay on here for Dr. Grimm's talk next. But after this, we'll be having a break, and then we'll go into panel sessions. You'll need to go back into the attendee hub. And then when those sessions are live, you can click on the live link. It's sort of a, I think, red button that says go live next to it. So with that, we're ready to go on to our next speaker. And Paul, if you'd like to join us, our next talk is from Dr. Paul Grimm. He is the professor of pediatric nephrology at Stanford University. He's going to be giving us a talk on anticipating renal replacement therapy and the Stanford protocol of combined stem cell transplant and kidney transplant from the same living donor. So we will see if we can get Dr. Grimm to be able to share his slides, and we'll go forward. We're looking for Dr. Grimm. And if everybody can give us one moment, we'll get his talk teed up. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We're getting Dr. Grimm connected, and we'll get started soon. So hang tight.
Ah, they just changed it.
Okay, great.
Okay, I think I'm on. I think I'm on.
You are on.
Yeah,
Hi, Dr.
sure.
Grimm. Sorry
All
about that.
right.
You knew we were going to have some kind of technical difficulties, right? Like,
Oh,
that's the way the world is these days.
yeah. So
Sorry,
anyway,
everyone.
I
No problem.
apologize. I apologize for the IT issues. Okay, you can see the screen that says "Woman receives pig's heart." All right, we're live.
Go
Good.
ahead. Yep, we're good. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. So there were two topics that I wanted to talk about to the group today. And some people might have heard this part of this presentation at other meetings, but I think it's so important. I just really wanted to emphasize. Oh, it isn't good. Okay, screen sharing. I just wanted to emphasize many people don't understand where their kidney function is. And whether you're a patient with cystinosis or a parent with a child with cystinosis, or you've had a kidney transplant 5 or 10 years ago, and your creatinine numbers are doing funny things, but you really don't understand. So the first part of this talk is to help you get empowered to understand your kidney function, because serum creatinine is not a very good indicator. Okay. In medical world, the GFR, glomerular filtration rate, which is how much your kidneys actually clean the blood, is what we really think about. But you don't get a GFR most of the time, especially if you're a kid. You get a creatinine. So this is to help you understand and interpret your creatinine or your kid's creatinine. So this is a screen capture of my health chart. So I can go log into this using a iPhone and click on my test results, my metabolic panel, which is tested every time you see a kidney doctor or a family doctor if you have a child with a person with kidney disease. And you scroll down, and there is my creatinine, 1.33. My creatinine of 1.33 means something depending on all sorts of things, my age, my sex, even my race. For example, here it says that my estimated GFR is 58. But if I was African American, my estimated GFR was 67. So this is a very controversial and potentially racist issue that is being dealt with right now by the medical community. But the point is the creatinine allows your doctors to guess what your GFR really is. Now, this girl has a creatinine of 0.5. And I apologize to the Europeans and Canadians watching because you use different units. But since the majority of the people are American, I'm going to use American units. I apologize. Now, what do you think the creatinine of this guy is? The best estimate I would have for a weightlifter who's overdosing on steroids and eating tons of protein would be about a 2.3. Now, if I had a 2.3, I'd be talking to my kidney transplant doctor about getting a kidney transplant. Later on, when he was a movie star, his creatinine's down a little bit. He's not pumping the steroids and working out quite so much. And then later on, when he's the governor of the great state of California, 1.3. So it's very much affected by the muscle you have. When your doctor makes an assessment of your kidney function, they put you in 5 buckets. The first bucket is normal GFR. So maybe you have a diagnosis of cystinosis, but your creatinine's normal, your GFR is normal. You're still called stage 1 CKD. At GFR of 60 to 90, stage 2, 30 to 60, stage 3, 15 to 30, stage 4. Less than 15 or dialysis is stage 5, also known as kidney failure. So that sort of tells you, because different buckets require different kinds of treatments. Now, let's look at this guy here, 16-year-old teenager, post-kidney transplant, used to be very adherent to all his medications. And then he turned 13 and he became a true teenager, and mom started finding pills in his pockets. And when he went to summer camp, mom cleaned his room and found hundreds of pills under the bed. So over time, his family had been watching his creatinine very carefully. And this is a graph of 2010 up to 2014. And what they were seeing was that his creatinine was sort of like 1.6, 1.5, 1.7, and was slowly drifting up. And then all of a sudden, over about a year, it started shooting up into the 3s and even 4s. And so the family are saying, something's changed. My son's getting worse. Something's wrong. We have to figure this out. But when you look at the GFR, that was a gradual trend that hadn't been changing over those 4 years, because the creatinine isn't good at interpreting the GFR. And actually, when we plotted the GFR, that had been a change that had been smooth and unchanging for 4 years. The problem is the creatinine and the GFR don't have a linear relationship. Wouldn't it be great if your GFR was 100 and it went down 25%, your creatinine would go up 25% like in a straight line? That's not the way it works. This is the way your creatinine and your GFR work. So when you have a normal GFR and it goes down 20, 30%, your creatinine barely budges. It goes down another 25%, starts moving up, down further, and then the creatinine just starts skyrocketing at the very end. This is something that makes it hard for people to interpret their kid's creatinine. This is that same patient, and the creatinine is plotted, and we have a different graph which sometimes helps people understand this. And look at the distance between a 1 and a 2 creatinine on this linear graph. Between a 2 and a 3, see how the distance is shorter? 3 to 4, even shorter. 4 to 5, a blink of an eye. And this is what people notice when their kidney is failing. The creatinine takes forever to go from 0.8 to 1.5 or 1.8. But that when you're at 4, it's just a short period of time when it goes to 5. So this is why the GFR is so important, because the GFR is linear in most patients. So you can predict the need for dialysis and transplant often. So this is examples of a patient's numbers over 2008 to 2011, and we can make plans for when his GFR is 10 to 15, because that's when he's going to need a dialysis and transplant. Patients lose renal function at a relatively constant rate specific for that person. And I'm going to put up a bunch of different charts. So this is a 10-year chart on a person who's losing kidney function slowly. And then here's someone faster, slow, but see how linear they are? And you might go quite a while with stable kidney function, then something changes, and then you have this downward trend, which is a line. Now, just because you have low kidney function doesn't mean you're going to lose your kidney right away. Some people can do really well for years and years and years with a relatively low kidney function. So it's not just the function you have, but it's the change of your GFR that counts. But it's more than just that. Here is a teenager who refused to start dialysis after their failed transplant. So their creatinine is their GFR is 45 to 50. We're plotting them really carefully, and then they start their downward trend over about 3 years. And here they're at a GFR of about 10 or 15. And we say, time to start dialysis to get ready for kidney transplant. And the person absolutely refused. And you can't hold down a teenager. This guy was a senior in high school. He was a varsity athlete, getting good grades. He said, I don't need a transplant. I feel fine. And over the next year, actually his GFR looked like it stabilized. Had he found a miracle that prevented his kidney from getting worse? Had he made a pact with the devil? No. What happened was he lost 10 kilograms, more than 20 pounds of muscle. He became malnourished. He stopped exercising because he didn't feel well. He deteriorated from being a varsity athlete who could run marathons to being unable to go for a walk with his mom. And his grades fell from A's to D's. So his estimated GFR didn't change because it's a guess based on your creatinine. That's why you have to not just look at a GFR, but you have to look at the patient. Look at their weight, their nutrition, their muscle mass, their general health, and their activity. And you put that together to make a proper estimate of how well that patient's doing. And it helps you predict when they're going to need dialysis and when they're going to need transplant. Why predict? Isn't it better to just be in the dark and live your life and then wait for that fateful day when your doctor says, okay, today you need dialysis or kidney transplant? Not if you want to be an empowered patient and family, and also push your doctor to do things that can help you. So how do you, as a layperson, calculate your child's GFR? Take this down. National Kidney Foundation Pediatric GFR Calculator. You do a search on the internet. You come to this page. You plug in your kid's serum creatinine, height, and sex, and it'll calculate the GFR. If your doctors check cystatin C, which is a different way of assessing the GFR that's less dependent on muscle, that's even better to have that. So if you have the creatinine, the cystatin C, the height, and the BUN, it gives you a more accurate estimate of your true GFR. And so you can go to your labs, which are available on your whatever hospital chart that you use as a patient. Every patient is able to get their own labs, and you can plug these in and you can look at it what it is over time. So if 2 years ago my kid's GFR was 50 and this year it's 30, so it's gone down by 20, in another couple of years it's going to be down around 10, 15. That's when they're going to need a kidney transplant. So you can make predictions. It's also important because there's a very difference in what's going to happen to your kid if they get on the waiting list before their 18th birthday or after their 18th birthday. If you get on the waiting list after your 18th birthday, you are classified as an adult. It doesn't matter if it's like 18 years, 1 day. You're an adult and there's no do-overs. If you're put on the waiting list 17 years, 11 months, you're a kid and you stay a kid. Why does this matter? This is a graph of adults' waiting time. I'll just go back one. For a kidney transplant after they're listed. The green line is the number of adults who've gotten a kidney transplant. So at 2 years after listing, only 20% of adults have gotten a kidney transplant from a deceased donor. Some have passed away. Some have gotten a kidney from a living donor, but only 20%. The average adult waiting time in California is sort of 8 to 10 years. Now, in some parts of the country, it's longer, in some parts it's shorter, but it's a long time. For kids, if they're put on the list before their 18th birthday, the waiting time is much shorter because they get a special dispensation. So here, this is the kids graph. At 1 year, about 38% will have gotten a kidney transplant compared to less than 20% of adults. By 2 years, almost 50% of kids will have gotten a deceased donor kidney transplant. So the waiting time, the average waiting time is about 1 to 2 years for a kidney transplant for a kid. But if they get on the waiting time, they get on the waiting list after their 18th birthday, it's much longer. So waiting time starts either the first day of chronic dialysis or after you've been evaluated and accepted to the kidney transplant wait list by a kidney transplant center. Now, adult kidney transplant centers usually say you have to have a GFR of 20 or less, but kids are more flexible. If your doctors say, the GFR is 30 or even 40, but I'm starting to see symptoms, or I feel it would be in this child's best interest to get a preemptive deceased donor kidney transplant, they can be put on the wait list early, not to actually get a kidney, but to start getting waiting time. So going through that waiting time so that when you really need a kidney, you already have a 2 years wait, so you're closer to the higher end of the list. Or you get on the waiting time, you get on the inactive list before your 18th birthday, you are thought of as a kid, even if you actually don't need that kidney till you're 22 or 23, so your waiting time is going to be shorter. So this is why it's important to take advantage of the options that you have to get the best outcome for your kid. Okay, changing the subject. Problem. When you have a kidney transplant, you take immunosuppressive medications, and they're wonderful drugs. They help protect that kidney from rejection. But those same drugs also reduce the body's ability to defend itself from cancer, from infection. Immunosuppression only works all the time if you take it all the time. And so teenagers are notorious for not taking their medication. So what that means is every kidney that's transplanted is only going to last 10, 15 years. So the research going on now is trying to develop tolerance so people's kidneys can last longer, they don't need to take drugs, and they won't be at risk for all the toxicities of the medications. Now at Stanford, so this is where research comes in. I think it's very important to know what's going on for your kid or yourself in the research community, and push your doctors to do whatever it takes to get you to participate in research projects and to do the right thing that research tells you to get better outcomes. We talk about chimerism. So this was a fanciful idea of animals that were mythical beasts that were part lion, part goat, part snake. But when we do a kidney transplant or another organ transplant, we are generating chimerism. You've got a kidney from one person and your body is someone else. But we're now looking at transplanting or adjusting people's immune systems so they can take care of a kidney without drugs or with less drugs. So there's two kinds of chimerism. There's mixed chimerism where you've got the donor's immune system floating around in your bloodstream and some of your own immune system. Or there's complete chimerism where we wipe out your own immune system and replace it with your donor's immune system. And there are different benefits for different ways of looking at this. But at Stanford, if you are an adult kidney transplant potential donor and recipient, and you have a perfect HLA match, this is like a brother to sister, there's a protocol going on in the adult patients which has been working pretty darn good, where you get a small amount of different kinds of immunosuppression on the day of the kidney transplant, and then after a week or two, you get immune cells of your donor. So your brother gives you a kidney, and then a couple weeks later, you get some of that brother's immune cells. And over time, most of the patients who get a fully matched kidney from a brother or sister are off medication. So they have patients now that are 14 years into this protocol, and the majority are alive. The majority are still off all immunosuppression. They have the same protocol that they've been working on and tweaking for haploidenticals. And the classic haploidentical is a parent to a kid transplant. They're not working as well. Most of the patients end up needing some immunosuppression, but they're still getting there. Now, this is for adult patients. Now, throughout the country and in Europe, there's a large study called the ONE study. 8 centers, which include European centers, Regensburg, Berlin, Nantes, Milan, Oxford, London, Boston, and our own UCSF, have come together to try to find different cells of the immune systems of either the donor or the recipient, and different mix and match of immunosuppression to try to trick the immune system to accept the kidney without toxic doses of medication. And they're making progress, but there's still a lot of work to do. But it's really important to know that these things are happening. So hopefully one day you won't need drugs with your kidney transplant. Problem with science is that everybody's looking for the easy answer. And usually the easy answer is simple and it makes sense, and Tucker Carlson will talk about it, but it'll be wrong. Science is hard and it's confusing and it's winding, but we are making progress. So I'm going to switch now to something we are doing in children at Stanford. So this is a protocol, and we've already been successful with 3 kids, and we've got 2 more in the pipeline, where we do a stem cell transplant from a parent, fully chimeric, using a new protocol which pretty much eliminates the risk of graft versus host disease. And then months later, we do a kidney transplant. So this is a disease called Schimke's immunoosseous dysplasia. If you think cystinosis is a bad disease, you don't know Schimke's. So Schimke's is rarer than cystinosis. These children are very short. They've got immune deficiency. They have problems with DNA repair. They all develop kidney failure by age of 10. If you do a regular kidney transplant, most of them get cancer, and ultimately they die of strokes in their 20s. So it's a hideous disease. And in the past, when people have done kidney transplants using the usual approaches, they have not done well. In the US in the last 5 years, most of the kids who've gotten a kidney transplant the regular way either died of infection or developed cancer. So we felt ethically it was the right situation to try a completely new research approach. So what we do at Stanford's is we do a very special kind of stem cell transplant called an alpha beta T cell depleted stem cell transplant. We also deplete the CD19s, and so we're left with just the stem cells that can regrow the immune system, and also other cells that facilitate the stem cells. So in Europe and in the USA, this protocol really originated in Italy. And we now have our head of stem cell transplant is Italian. We snatched her from Rome. They've done over 300 of these stem cell transplants and have very low rates of graft versus host disease. You then give this special product of stem cells to the recipient, and they do very well. So a little bit of radiation, not very much. Like the typical dose of radiation in most stem cell transplants is 5,000 centigrade. We give just 200, just enough to irritate the immune system. Some drugs. In our protocol, the patients are engrafted by 2 weeks, so it's a relatively mild approach. Some have had skin graft, a little bit of graft versus host disease, which fully recovered. And after recovery from the stem cell transplant in 3 to 5 months, if they're 100% chimeric, and fortunately everyone we've done so far has been, we do a living donor kidney transplant from the donor who gave the stem cells. No immunosuppression is needed ever. There's no risk of rejection, no risk of late cancers like so many people with cystinosis get, PTLD, no risk of non-adherence because you're not taking any medications. And there's no countdown to the next transplant because there's no drug toxicity, there's no chronic rejection. There's no reason to think that this kidney is going to have a shortened life. This is a picture of one family that have had this process done. This dad gave his stem cells and later on his kidney to this girl. This mom gave her stem cells and later on her kidney to this boy. And we have, like I said, another patient who's successfully gotten a kidney transplant, and 2 more are in the pipeline who've gotten their stem cell transplants. We have not done any cystinosis patients yet, but we've done more than 10 patients with various genetic diseases who've gotten the stem cell transplant and no severe graft versus host disease so far. Touch wood. Why is this important? Oh yeah, it's because those same stem cells should correct cystinosis. We know that because Elena Levchenko did one of these using old-fashioned techniques a few years back. This was a 16-year-old boy who had cystinosis, lots of side effects from the medications. And so they decided to do a MUD, a marrow unrelated donor transplant. That patient got stem cells from an unrelated donor, kidney function stabilized, high urine output got better, photophobia score went down, biopsy showed clearance of the crystals. So the stem cells from the stranger worked. Problem was, there was lots of complications caused by graft versus host disease, and ultimately the patient passed away. So this made everybody very scared of stem cell transplantation in cystinosis. And this is why the protocol using the lentivirus vector is so cool. This is that San Diego protocol that we're going to hear more about, because it takes your own stem cells, fixes the cystinosis, and you get your own stem cells back, so there shouldn't be any graft versus host disease. The downside is you have your own immune system. So if you're on track to get a kidney transplant or need one, that doesn't do anything for that. So our protocol, which we are offering now to pediatric genetic diseases, including cystinosis patients, if you have a haploidentical or fully matched living donor, you can be pre-dialysis or on dialysis. And as long as there's no strong DSA, which means this is your first kidney transplant, we would consider you. And so what that means is we would see you, assess you, and if everything was a go, we would do the stem cell transplant from your parent or sibling donor, let you recover, and then do the kidney transplant. It's research. We can't guarantee it's going to work, but we're very optimistic. So I have 1 minute left, and I started a little bit late, so I'm glad that we're back on target. And I don't know if there's time for questions, Christy, or if I should just wait for the conference later, but I'm going to unshare my screen.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Grimm. Really really fantastic, exciting, news on the new regimen that you have going at Stanford. We appreciate the update on it. I apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning. I'm glad that we got it all in, and thank you for keeping us on track. I am going to, so I want to let everyone know I'm collecting the questions that are showing up in the chat. We're not going to have time to address all of them. I am going to note that Dr. Grimm will be part of the medical panel later today. And so we will make sure that these questions that maybe aren't addressed now, are asked of Dr. Grimm. And then if we don't get to all our questions during these virtual sessions, we have a plan to reach out to people individually and get answers for you. I am going to ask you one question, Dr. Grimm, and this is because it's very, applicable to this talk. We do have a question about how the rest of the world can benefit from this possible treatment at Stanford. Is it primarily for US citizens, or are you planning to introduce it around the world?
So at this point, the stem cell transplant is billed to insurance. So people need to have insurance to be able to access to this. It's amazing to me, the protocols that are set up allow the insurance companies to pay for it. And they've been doing it because they recognize how expensive the drug therapy for kidney transplant rejection is and ultimate graft loss. So right now, you have to have insurance to be able to do it. However, once we get this sorted out, it could be anywhere. And if you are Italian, for example, this protocol is active at Bambino Gesù Hospital, the Pope's Hospital in Rome. So in other parts of the world, the same stem cell transplant protocol that we're researching with kidney transplant could be gotten there. I don't know about other centers, but I do believe that we really, if this really works, and we're at the bleeding edge here. We're going to make the mistakes. We're going to try the new stuff. But if we get it down, then it could go rapidly to other places.
So the answer to the question is it's complicated, and it's tied to insurance and like everything else. But it's moving out into the rest of the world, and I think that's great. And so I apologize, we have to end now. We're going into our next sessions. Thank you so much, Dr. Grimm, for taking the time to do that presentation for us. We'll see you later in the day. I just want to note to everyone, you'll need to leave this session, go into the attendee hub, and then click on the links for the panel session you would like to attend. We have the first group of panel sessions for the next hour. We'll have a half-hour break and then go back into the attendee hub to log into our second round of panel sessions, and then finally the medical panel. So thanks to everybody for the morning session, and everybody can go straight to the attendee hub and log into your panel sessions. Thanks, everybody.